Nick, thanks for joining us. We're going to delve straight into the technical questions. And my first one for you is, why should we reuse water, and what are the benefits of greywater reuse?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tom. The question you ask is, why should we reuse water? The question is actually, why shouldn't we reuse water? We've been stuck with this conventional system of purifying water to a drinking water quality, which is a very high standard and is very energy consuming. And what we do is we flush the toilets with it. So why can't we rethink what we do with water, revalue the water that we have, the good, clean drinking water? And once you have it in your building, a lot of effort has been put into it. And why shouldn't you reuse it then? And greywater recycling is one of those means to reuse it. It's lightly contaminated, so it's not too polluted yet. If it gets too polluted, the energy that you have to put in to take all the pollution out is great. If it's lightly polluted like greywater, it's fairly simple, energy efficient to clean that water, to make it up to a level good enough to flush toilets, put in your laundry or your washing machine, and for outside use, topping up your pool or irrigating the garden.
Is there any benefits around the reduction of wastewater? So if you're reusing it for other applications, is there any risks or benefits that come out of actually utilizing that water rather than sending it all down the sewer?
Are you talking about the reusing of the treated greywater or the reduction of wastewater? Because those are
wastewater. Yeah.
That's one of the big differences that is tricky for people to understand, because it has been such a given how a plumbing system works, and rainwater use has been introduced. Then you save drinking water, but the rainwater still goes down the sewer. But if you use greywater, you actually catch off some of the water that would go into the drain, reuse it again. So roughly the same amount or the same percentage of drinking water that you reuse, you also save on wastewater. And we see in a lot of parts in the world that waste or stress on the wastewater system, especially with the ever expanding urbanization, is becoming a real issue. So councils are looking to sometimes even reduce wastewater more as a priority than cutting drinking water use. So with greywater recycling, you get both a double whammy basically, and you save your drinking water and you save on wastewater production.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I think if the price of water, that's definitely a key consideration. It is quite cheap in a lot of countries, and
Yes.
yeah, but it is definitely not cheap to treat wastewater. So I'm sure that's a key part of the consideration for the water authorities.
Yeah, and true, the drinking water is very cheap, and it's good because it's the essence of life. It's not a sustainability issue. It's really an essence of life, drinking water or safe water. And what you see is that there's a big shift in maybe separating drinking water charges and wastewater charges, even metering it. Some countries have that, and 2/3 of the cost go into the wastewater treatment and are being put back on the household. Because that's the other thing, if you talk about cost, is that a lot of the benefits of recycling greywater might not be there where the costs lie, because the homeowner will recycle its greywater, it have a reduction on the system. So the benefits lay with the utility companies and the cost lay with the homeowner. So that's something in terms of regulatory framework that needs to be ironed out, and that's different in every part of the world.
So is reuse applications applicable in all building types, whether it be like multi-story buildings or commercial versus residential? Can you reuse water in all applications, or is it harder in some than others?
Well, with greywater reuse, you need a certain amount of biological loading because what it is basically a little wastewater treatment. So, for example, if you have no showers in an office building where you only have hand wash basins, then depending on what kind of system you use, it becomes a bit more difficult. Also because of the amount of grey water or recycled water that you need. If you want to flush your toilets with it, you have to have enough water coming in. So you have you need the right balance. So for an office block, the hand wash basins could be reused for putting into your toilet. But as you can imagine, the amount of water that comes from waste hand wash basins is much smaller than you need for your toilets. So that doesn't work. But aside from that, hotels is a great type of building because there's lots of showers and lots of toilets. That's a really good fit. So you can put a recycler in there and save 30 to 40% on both drinking water and wastewater. Houses is good because it's often scalable. Our system is designed for houses but can be scaled up for commercial buildings. And hotels, it's scalable and it's applicable to most buildings, but you need enough water coming in order to recycle enough for going out.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you've got to find that balance of available greywater to actually treat and reuse for the particular application that you're looking to use it in. There's obviously a lot of different products on the market. Is there a lot of difference in the way that they operate?
The main difference is whether they use filters, membranes, and or chemicals. So it's basically a treatment process is often, it's made out of different stages. You have the sedimentation to make sure that the heavy particles flow down, so it has to sit for a while. It has to be aerated so the water doesn't go anaerobe and dies basically. And the aeration makes sure that the algae can eat all the dirt. You have to skim off some of the suds that are still left or solids that are still left in the water, and then you have an after treatment with UV disinfection to make sure that the biological loading, residual loading that's still in the water, that doesn't grow, so you kill that off. And a lot of manufacturers use ultrafiltration membranes for that. We don't use any filters. So it's a completely natural process, which makes the maintenance a bit lower. It's all based on a similar principle, but I think those are the biggest differences. There's a couple of good manufacturers around, but I think it's a handful. So there's there's a small variety in it.
Yeah. So you mentioned that the biological processes involved in managing that grey water. Is there a process or the ability for building owners or homeowners to monitor that process or have an indication if there's something going wrong? How do they manage the kind of monitoring of the systems?
Yeah, each manufacturer does that in a different way. I know that because we are certified according to NSF 350, that standard has a procedure with an audible alarm when critical items are malfunctioning. So there's a minimum threshold that you have to notify building users or homeowners of a system failing. What we have is we're connected to the internet for continuous monitoring. That can be also done through an app, so you see how much water you recycle, what maintenance needs to be done. And there's a remote access from sales engineers who can look into the system if there are complaints about what could possibly be the root cause.
Yeah, there's apps for everything these days, isn't it? And I think
there's apps for everything, even for your grey water recycling system. Yeah.
To be able to see the live data and how much water you've saved and how the system's operating, I think it's a really important thing for homeowners and maybe commercial building owners like hotels.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's often for the commercial buildings, it's linked to the building management system. But for homeowners, it's also important to create awareness. We see that, or we have seen that with the energy market, especially because the prices rise, so it's more expensive over there than it is with water. But you see that a lot of people, even when they're on holiday on the beach, are looking at the apps, see what's happening with the solar panel, or feedback into the grid, what's happening with the energy that my house is using. And it would be great to get something like that going for water as well.
Yeah, I think that's the natural next step, isn't it? To be able to monitor what's happening water-wise in your building or in your home. And I think that technology is probably not too far away. You mentioned the price of water before, and it is relatively cheap in a lot of countries. So when it's not costing a lot, we did the comparison between PV panels and electricity. Electricity isn't cheap in a lot of countries, so the PV as a alternative kind of creates that value for money proposition. But when water's so cheap, I think there's probably a few reasons why people might be moving towards water reuse, and I wanted to get your insights as a manufacturer of why water reuse is so important.
Yeah, as a manufacturer, that's what we see is one of the big roadblocks, because the return on investment, especially for homeowners, is long. If you look at commercial buildings, it's completely different. Hotel chains, aside from the fact that they are using BREEAM or LEED labels, which water saving get you points, which helps. But there's also, they get charged differently for wastewater. So that's a proper return on investment argument for them to start reusing their own water. But if you look at the homeowners, when you mentioned the example of PV panels, you saw that it was also a very slow start, and it only accelerated after subsidies were given by governments. And I think that would be the same in the startup phase for greywater recycling in homes. We see that in the Florida Keys, where there's such a water scarcity that the government put mandates in place. First of all, you get rebates, so that's that whole subsidy program. But also because there is no water, they say you have to put water saving devices in. So if you save so much amount of drinking water, you're allowed to build more buildings. And you see then the developers and the banks are starting to get into action and look at how to basically how to build more houses. In that case, also banks, talking about that, are looking at what does a water efficient building do with the house prices. Same as done with the electricity or energy efficiency about 15 years ago. You see that starting to happen with the water side of things now as well. And that will change the playing field for greywater recycling.
Yeah, you mentioned the US, and it's a good example where I guess particular regulatory drivers are changing the way that people operate in developing new housing estates and managing the water that might not be available, and then having to be creative about how they address that. Is there any other governments around the world that you've been working with to come up with other solutions in the reuse space?
Sorry, I missed the last question. Can you repeat, please?
So is there other governments around the world that you've been working with in the reuse space to try and, I guess, implement some policy changes and see a greater adoption of reuse technologies? Yep.
From so we are based in Europe, so we've got the European standard that we helped develop and is now in place, which is good to create a level playing field around Europe for multiple manufacturers. In the US, we see that different states operate differently because we think of it as a country. Well, when you don't live in the US at least, but it's not. It's United States. So different states are looking at each other. What are they doing? What is working? And we are sometimes on the sideline or involved in that process. In the Middle East, we are working with the ministry on a regulatory sandbox, which is basically pilot legislation to see if in Saudi Arabia greywater recycling can be introduced. And in Australia, we are working towards creating a new category of in-house greywater recycling systems to get a watermark certificate for our product, but also enable other manufacturers to enter the market, because there's a high demand. But you see that legislation is based on the olden days, or what we have always done, and innovation is always tricky to put into that legislation. So we are working in this case with you guys, with ICC, together to see how we can get all the plumbing regulators on board and make sure that they understand how it works and why there should be a different category. So yeah, we are paving the path for other people to follow. So hopefully it will pay off in the end.
Yeah, I think that's always a challenge, and it's not something unique to Australia either. There's always the challenge of regulations keeping pace with the rapid rate of innovation, and I think this is one particular area. So it's great to see your leadership in working with governments to try and work through some of those challenges. You mentioned innovation and change. One of the things that I'd like to kind of pick your brain on a little bit is if you have any predictions around water reuse and water scarcity issues into the future from your focus on the industry. What do you see coming into the near and long-term future?
Well, a couple of years ago, it was every so many years you heard about water scarcity, both on the supply side and wastewater production side, that there's too much. And now it's every couple of months in all around the world, in all different jurisdictions. So you see that the water stress level, also indicated by the United Nations, is rising and is not likely to drop. The European Union is quite forward, if you want to say, in trying to be more water resilient. And we see that happening in Australia with the water utilities companies, because they are the first one to feel the effects of it, because they have to supply water and they can't at the moment. You see that in parts of Europe as well. In the Middle East, there isn't any water, but there's so much energy that they just desalinate. But they also understand that it's not a sustainable solution because we're not talking about 3 years in the future or 5 years in the future. You have to look at 50 years in the future. And if we keep doing the things we're doing now, then 50 years in the future, we will have massive problems. So we have to start changing the systems. It might get a bit more complicated with different water streams, but that's the only way to keep having the same level of safety, sanitation as we have now, or as we have had. So yeah, that's you have to look a bit further than 5 years, but that's the way we have to go.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. If you don't start making the necessary changes now, you've got to take that first step to be able to get to that end finish line 50 years down the track. Well, that's probably all my questions for you, Nick. I really appreciate you spending the time with us and sharing your knowledge. And I'll share your contact details as well at the end of the presentation. If anyone wants to reach out and get a bit more of an understanding of the products, then I'll make sure that they can direct them that way. Thanks again for your time. I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge, and I'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks for having me. Thank you.